Hello, kids! My name is Snowball, the Christmas puppy. Come, gather around the fire with my 3 buddies, Dancer, Lars, and Comet, as I tell you some of the most beautiful Christmas tales. Our first tale is called The Legend of the White Gifts, and it goes like this. A great many years ago, in a land far away from us, there was a certain king who was dearly beloved by all of his people. Men admired him because he was strong and just. In all his dealings, they knew that they could depend on him. Every matter that came to his consideration was carefully weighed in his mind, and his decisions were always wise. Women trusted him because he was pure and true, with lofty thoughts of high ambitions, and the children loved him because of his gentleness and tenderness toward them. He was never so burdened with affairs of state that he could not stop to speak a pleasant word of greeting to the tiniest child, and the very poorest of his subjects knew they could count upon his interest in them. This deep-seated love and reverence for their king made the people of his country wish very much for a way in which they could give expression to it, so that he would understand it. Many consultations were held, and one after another the plans suggested were rejected. But at last, a most happy solution was found. It was rapidly circulated here and there, and it met with the most hearty approval everywhere. It was a plan for celebrating the king's Christmas. Of course, that had to be done in many lands before, but there were certain features about this celebration which differed materially than anything that had ever been tried. They decided that on Christmas Day, the people should all bring the king gifts, but they wanted in some way to let him know that these gifts were an expression of a love on the part of the giver, which was pure and true and unselfish. And in order to show that, it was decided that each gift would be a white gift. The king heard about this beautiful plan, and it touched his heart in a wonderful way. He decided that he would do his part to carry out the idea and let his loving subjects know how much he appreciated their thoughtfulness. You can just imagine the excitement that was all over the land when Christmas drew near. All sorts of loving sacrifices had been made, and everyone was anxious to make his gift the very best he had to offer. At last, the day dawned, and eagerly the people came dressed in white and carrying their white gifts. To their surprise, they were ushered into a great big room, the largest one in the palace. They stood in silence when they first entered it, for it was beautiful beyond expression. It was a white room. The floor was white marble. The ceiling looked like a mass of soft, white, fluffy clouds. The walls were hung with beautiful white silken draperies, and all the furnishings were white. In one end of the room stood a stately white throne, and seated upon it was their beloved ruler, and he was clad in shining white robes, and his attendants, all dressed in white, were grouped around him. Then came the presentation of the gifts. What a wealth of them there was, and how different they were in value. In those days, it was just as it is now. There were many people who had great wealth, and they brought gifts which were generous in proportion to their wealth. One brought a beautiful handful of pearls, another a number of carved ivories. There were beautiful laces and silks and embroideries, all in pure white. And even splendid white chargers were brought to His Majesty. But many of the people were poor. Some of them were very poor, and their gifts were quite different from those that I've been telling about. Some of the women brought handfuls of white rice. Some of the boys brought their favorite white pigeons. And one dear little girl smilingly gave him a pure white rose. It was wonderful to watch the king as each one came and kneeled before him as he presented his gift. He never seemed to notice whether the gift was great or small. He regarded not one gift above another so long as they were all white. Never had the king been so happy as he was that day, and never had such real joy filled the hearts of the people. They decided to use the same plan every Christmas. And so it came to pass that year after year the people came from here and there and everywhere and brought their white gifts. The gifts which showed that their love was pure, strong, true, without stain. And year after year the king sat in his white robes on the white throne in a great white room, and it was always the same. He regarded not one gift above another, so long as they were all white. What an amazing gift the Christ child gave to two little boys. Speaking of trees, gather round, children. The next story is just a wonderful one. It's the legend of how the fir tree became the Christmas tree. At the time when the Christ child was born, all the people, the animals, and the trees and plants were very happy. The child was born to bring peace and happiness to the whole world. People came daily to see the little one, and they always brought gifts with them. There were 3 trees standing near the manger, which saw the people, and they wished that they too might give presents to the Christ child. The palm said, "I will choose my most beautiful leaf and place it as a fan over the child." "And I," said the olive, "will sprinkle sweet-smelling oil upon his head." "What can I give the child?" asked the fir who stood near. You have nothing to offer him. Your needles would prick him. "And your tears are sticky." So the poor little fir tree was very unhappy, and it said, "Yes, you are right. I have nothing to offer the Christ child." Now, quite near the trees, stood the Christmas angel, who heard all that the trees had said. The angel was sorry for the fir tree, who was so lowly without envy of the other trees. So when it was dark and the stars came out, he begged a few of the little stars to come down and rest upon the branches of the fir tree. They did as the Christmas angel asked, and the fir tree shone suddenly with a beautiful light. And at that very moment, the Christ child opened his eyes, for he had been asleep. And as the lonely light fell upon him, he smiled. Every year, people keep the dear Christmas child's birthday by giving gifts to each other. And every year, in remembrance of his first birthday, the Christmas angel places in every house a fir tree, also covered in starry candles. It shines for the children as the stars shone for the Christ child. The fir tree was rewarded for its meekness, for to no other tree is it given to shine upon so many happy faces. One of my favorite Christmas tales is called The 3 Kings, and this is how it goes. 3 kings came riding from far away, Melchior and Gaspar and Balthazar. 3 wise men out of the east were they, and they traveled by night and slept by day, for their guide was a beautiful, wonderful star. The star was so beautiful, large, and clear, and all the other stars in the sky became a white mist in the atmosphere, and by this they knew that the coming was near of the prince foretold in the prophecy. 3 caskets they bore on their saddle bows, 3 caskets of gold and golden keys. Their robes were of crimson silk and rows of bells and pomegranates and furbelows, their turbans like blossoming almond trees. And so the 3 kings rode into the west, through the dusk of the night, over the hill and dell, and sometimes they nodded with beard on breast, and sometimes talked as they paused to rest. With the people they met at some wayside well. "Of the child that is born," said Balthazar, "good people, I pray you, tell us the news, for we in the east have seen this star, and have ridden fast, and have ridden far, to find and worship the King of the Jews." And the people answered, "Psst! You ask in vain. We know of no king but Herod the Great." They thought the wise men were insane, as they spurred their horses across the plain like riders in haste who cannot wait. And when they came to Jerusalem, Herod the Great, who heard this thing, sent for the wise men and questioned them, and said, "Go down to Bethlehem and bring me tidings of this new king." So they rode away, and the star stood still, the only one in the gray of morn. Yes, it stopped. It stood there on its own free will, right over Bethlehem on the hill, the city of David where Christ was born. And the 3 kings rode through the gate and the guard, through the silent street, till their horses turned and neighed as they entered the great inn yard. But the windows were closed and the doors were barred, and only a light in the stable burned, and cradled there in the scented hay, in the air made sweet by the breath of kine, the little child in the manger lay, the child that would be king one day, of a kingdom not human, but divine. His mother, Mary of Nazareth, sat watching beside his place of rest, watching the even flow of his breath. They laid their offerings at his feet, the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh. And the mother wondered and bowed her head, and sat as still as a statue of stone. Her heart was troubled, yet comforted, remembering what the angel had said, of an endless reign and of David's throne. Then the kings rode out of the city gate, with a clatter of hoofs in proud array. But they went not back to Herod the Great, for they knew his malice and feared his hate, and returned to their homes by another way. What a wonderful story! Our next Christmas tale is called Little Piccola, about a little girl who received the most wonderful Christmas surprise. Piccola lived in Italy, where the oranges grow, and where all year the sun shines warm and bright. I suppose you think Piccola was a very strange name for a little girl, but in her country it was not strange at all, and her mother thought it was the sweetest name a little girl ever had. Piccola had no kind father, no big brother or sister, and no sweet baby to play with and love. She and her mother lived all alone in an old stone house. That looked on a dark, narrow street. They were very poor, and the mother was away from home almost every day, washing clothes and scrubbing floors and working hard to earn money for her little girl and herself. So you see, Piccola was alone a great deal of the time. And if she had not been a very happy, contented little child, I hardly know what she would have done. She had no playthings except a heap of stones in the backyard that she used for building houses, and a very old, very ragged doll that her mother had found in the street one day. But there was a small, round hole in the stone wall at the back of her yard, and her greatest pleasure was to look through that into her neighbor's garden. When she stood on a stone and put her eyes close to the hole, she could see the green grass in the garden, and smell the sweet flowers, and even hear the water splashing into the fountain. She had never seen anyone walking in the garden, for it belonged to an old gentleman who did not care about grass and flowers. One day in the autumn, her mother told her that the old gentleman had gone away and had rented his house to a family of little American children who had come with their sick mother to spend the winter in Italy. After this, Piccola was never lonely, for all day long the children ran and played and danced and sang in the garden. It was several weeks before they saw her at all, and I'm not sure that they would have ever done so, but one day the kitten ran away, and in chasing her, they came close to the wall and saw Piccola's black eyes looking through the hole in the stones. They were a little frightened at first and did not speak to her, but the next day she was there again, and Rose, the oldest girl, went up to the wall and talked to her a little while. When the children found that she had no one to play with and she was very lonely, they talked to her every day and often brought her fruits and candies and passed them through the hole in the wall. One day, they even pushed the kitten through, but the hole was hardly large enough for her, and she mewed and scratched, and she was very much frightened. Meow! 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 After that, the little boy said he would ask his father if the hole might not be made larger, and then Piccola could come in and play with them. The father had found out that Piccola's mother was a very good woman, and that the little girl herself was sweet and kind. So he was very glad to have some of the stones broken away and made an opening for Piccola to come in. How excited she was, and how glad the children were when she first stepped into the garden. She wore her best dress, a long, bright-colored woolen skirt with a white waist. Around her neck was a string of beads, and on her feet were little wooden shoes. It would seem very strange to us, would it not, to wear wooden shoes? But Piccola and her mother had never worn anything else, and never had the money to buy stockings. Piccola almost always ran about barefooted, like the kittens and the chickens and the little ducks. What a good time they had that day, and how glad Piccola's mother was that her little girl could have such a pleasant, safe place to play in while she was at work. And how glad Piccola's mother was. By and by, December came, and the little Americans began to talk about Christmas. One day, when Piccola's curly head and bright eyes came peeping through the hole in the wall, and they ran to her and helped her in, and as they did so, they all asked her at once what she thought she would have for a Christmas present. "A Christmas present?" said Piccola. "Why, what is that?" All the children looked surprised at this, and Rose said, rather gravely, "Dear Piccola, don't you know what Christmas is?" Oh, yes. Piccola knew it was the happy day when the baby Christ was born, and she had been to church on the day and heard the beautiful singing and had seen the picture of the babe lying in the manger with cattle and sheep sleeping round about. Oh, yes, she knew all that very well. But what was a Christmas present? The children began to laugh and answer her all together. There was such a clatter of tongues that she could hear only a few words now and then, such as chimney, Santa Claus, stockings,
reindeer,
Christmas Eve,
candies, and twice.
Piccola put her hands over her ears and said, "Oh, I can't understand one word. You tell me, Rose." Then Rose told her all about jolly Santa Claus with his red cheeks and white beard and fur coat, and all about his reindeer and sleigh full of toys. "Dear Piccola, every Christmas Eve," said Rose, "he comes down the chimney and fills the stockings of all the good children. So Piccola, you hang up your stocking, and who knows what a beautiful present you will find when the morning comes." Of course, Piccola thought this was a delightful plan and was very pleased to hear about it. Then all the children told her of every Christmas Eve they could remember and of the presents they had had, so that she went home thinking of nothing but dolls and hoops and balls and ribbons and marbles and wagons and kites. She told her mother about Santa Claus, and her mother seemed to think that perhaps he did not know that there was any little girl in that house, and very likely he would not come at all. But Piccola felt very sure Santa Claus would remember her, for all her little friends had promised to send a letter up the chimney to remind him. Christmas Eve came at last. Piccola's mother hurried home from work. They had their little supper of soup and bread, and soon it was bedtime. Time to get ready for Santa Claus. But oh, Piccola remembered then for the first time that the children had told her she must hang up her stocking. And she hadn't any, and neither had her mother. How sad it was. Now Santa would come and perhaps be angry because he couldn't find any place to put the present. The poor little girl stood by the fireplace, and the big tears began to run down her cheeks. Just then, her mother called to her. "Hurry, Piccola, come to bed." What should she do? But she stopped crying and tried to think. And in a moment, she remembered her wooden shoes and ran off to get one of them. She put it close to the chimney and said to herself, "Surely Santa Claus will know what it's here for. He will know I haven't any stockings. So I gave him the shoe instead." Then she went off happily to her bed, and she was asleep almost as soon as she had nestled close to her mother's side. Next morning, when Piccola awoke, the sun had only just begun to shine. With one jump, she was out the door and running toward the chimney. The wooden shoe was lying where she had left it, but you could never guess what was in it. Piccola had not meant to wake her mother, but this surprise was more than any little girl could bear and yet be quiet. So she danced in the bed with the shoe in her hand, calling, "Mother, Mother, look, look! See the present Santa Claus brought me?" Her mother raised her head and looked into the shoe. "Why, Piccola," she said, "a little chimney swallow nestling in your shoe? What a good Santa Claus to bring you a bird." "Good Santa Claus, dear Santa Claus!" cried Piccola as she kissed her mother and kissed the bird and kissed the shoe. And even threw kisses up the chimney, she was so happy. When the birdling was taken out of the shoe, they found that he did not try to fly, only to hop around the room. And as they looked closer, they could see that one of his wings was hurt a little. But the mother bound it up carefully so that it did not seem to pain him, and he was so gentle that he took a drink of water from a cup and even ate crumbs and seeds out of Piccola's hands. She was a proud little girl when she took her Christmas present to show the children in the garden. They had had many great gifts. Dolls that could say, "Mama," bright picture books, trains of cars, toy pianos, but not one of their playthings was alive, like Piccola's birdling. They were as pleased as she, and Rose hunted about the house until she found a large wicker cage that belonged to a blackbird she once had. She gave the cage to Piccola, and the swallow seemed to make himself quite at home in it at once, and sat on the perch, winking his bright eyes at the children. Rose had saved a bag of candies for Piccola. And when she went home at last, with the cage and her dear swallow safely inside it, I am sure that there was not a happier little girl in the whole country of Italy. And so ends this beautiful Christmas tale. Now I will tell you the story of how this wonderful holiday we call Christmas came to be. Christmas Day, as you know, dear children, is Christ's birthday. And I want to tell you why we love it so much, and why we try to make everyone happy when it comes each year. A long, long time ago, the baby Christ was born on Christmas Day. A baby so wonderful and so beautiful, who grew up to be a man so wise, so good, so patient and sweet, that every year the people who knew about him love him better and better. and are more and more glad when his birthday comes again. You see that he must have been very good and wonderful, for people have always remembered his birthday and kept it lovingly for so many years. He was born long years ago in a land far, far away across the seas. Before the baby Christ was born, Mary, his mother, had to make a long journey with her husband, Joseph. They made this journey to be taxed and counted, for in those days, this could not be done in the town where people happened to live, but they must be numbered in a place where they were born. In that far-off time, the only way of traveling was on a horse, or a camel, or a good, patient donkey. Camels and horses cost a great deal of money, and Mary was very poor. So she rode on a quiet, safe donkey, while Joseph walked by her side, leading him and leaning on his stick. Mary was very young and beautiful, but Joseph was a great deal older than she. People dress nowadays in those distant countries just as they did so many years ago. So we know that Mary must have worn a long, thick dress, falling all about her in heavy folds, and that she had a soft white veil over her head and neck and across her face. Mary lived in Nazareth, and the journey they were making was to Bethlehem, many miles away. They were traveling a long time, I am sure, for donkeys are slow, though they are so careful. And Mary must have been very tired before they came to the end of their journey. They had traveled all day, and it was almost dark when they came near to Bethlehem, to the town where the baby Christ was born. There was a place they were to stay, a kind of inn or lodging house, but not at all like those you know about. They have them today in that far-off country, just as they built them so many years ago. It was a low, flat-roofed, stone building with no windows and only one large door. There were no nicely furnished bedrooms inside, and no soft white beds for the tired travelers. There were only little places built into the stones of the wall, something like the berths on the steamboats nowadays. And each traveler brought his own bedding. No pretty garden was in front of the inn, for the road ran close to that very door, so the dust lay upon the doorsill. All around the house, to a high, rocky road in the back, a heavy stone fence was built, so that the people and the animals inside might be kept safe. Mary and Joseph could not get very near the inn, for the whole road in front was filled with camels and donkeys and sheep and cows, while a great many men were going to and fro, taking care of the animals. Some of these people have come to Bethlehem to pay their taxes as Mary and Joseph have done, and others were staying for the night on their way to Jerusalem, a large city a little further on. The yard was filled too with camels and sheep, and men were lying on the ground beside them, resting and watching and keeping them safe. The inn was so full and the yard was so full of people that there was no room for anybody else. And the keeper had to take Joseph and Mary through the house and back to the high hill, where they found another place that was used for a stable. This only had a door and a front, and deep caves were behind, stretching far into the rocks. This was the spot where Christ was born. Think how poor a place! But Mary was glad to be there after all, and when the Christ child came, he was like other babies, and had so lately come from heaven that he was happy everywhere. There were mangers all around the cave, where the cattle and sheep were fed, and great heaps of hay and straw were lying on the floor. Then, I think, there were brown-eyed cows and oxen there, and quiet, woolly sheep, and perhaps even some dogs that had come to take care of the sheep. And there by the cave, by and by, the wonderful baby came, and they wrapped him up and laid him in the manger. All the stars in the sky shone brightly that night, for they knew the Christ child was born, and the angels in heaven sang together for joy. The angels knew about the lovely child and were glad that he had come to help the people on earth to be good. There lay a beautiful baby, with a manger for his bed, and oxen and sheep, all sleeping quietly around him. His mother watched him and loved him. Many people came to see him, for they have heard that a wonderful child was to be born in Bethlehem.
All the people in the inn visited him, and even the shepherds left their flocks in the fields and sought the child and his mother. But the baby was very tiny and could not talk any more than any other tiny child. So he lay in his mother's lap, or in the manger, and only looked at the people. So after they had seen him and left him, they went away again. After a time, when the baby had grown larger, Mary took him back to Nazareth, and there he lived and grew up. And he grew to be such a sweet, wise, loving boy, such a tender, helpful man. And he said so many good and beautiful things that everyone who knew him loved him. Many of the things he said are in the Bible, you know, and a great many beautiful stories of the things he used to do while he was here on earth. He loved little children like you very much, and often used to take them up in his arms and talk to them. And this is the reason we love Christmas Day so much and try to make everybody happy when it comes around each year. This is the reason, because Christ, who was born on Christmas Day, has helped us all to be good so many, many times, and because he was the best Christmas present the world ever had. Next is the beautiful tale of two little boys who met a very special child on a cold winter's night. Two little children were sitting by the fire on Christmas Eve. All at once, they heard a timid knock at the door, and one ran to open it. There, outside in the cold and in the darkness, stood a child with no shoes upon his feet and clad in thin, ragged garments. He was shivering with cold, and he asked to come in and warm himself. "Yes, come," cried both the children. "You shall have our place by the fire. Come in." They drew the little stranger to their warm seat and shared their supper with him and gave him their bed while they slept on a hard bench. In the night, they were awakened by strains of sweet music, and looking out, they saw a band of children in shining garments approaching the house. They were playing on golden harps, and the air was full of melody. Suddenly, the stranger child stood before them, no longer cold and ragged, but clad in silvery light. His soft voice said, "I was cold, and you took me in. I was hungry, and you fed me. I was tired, and you gave me your bed. I am the Christ child, wandering through the world to bring happiness and peace to all good children. As you have given to me, so may this tree every year give rich fruit to you." He broke a branch from the fir tree that grew near the door, and he planted it in the ground and disappeared. But the branch grew into a great tree, and every year it bore wonderful golden fruit for the kind children. The next story is the tale of Babushka, an old Christmas legend, and it goes like this. It was the night the dear Christ child came to Bethlehem. In a country far away from him, an old woman named Babushka sat in her snug little house by her warm fire. The wind was drifting the snow outside and howling down the chimney, but it only made Babushka's fire burn more brightly. "How glad I am that I may stay indoors," said Babushka, holding her hands out to the bright blaze. But suddenly, she heard a loud rap at the door. She opened it, and her candle shone on 3 old men standing outside in the snow. Their beards were as white as the snow, and so long that they reached the ground. Their eyes shone kindly in the light of Babushka's candle, and their arms were full of precious things, boxes of jewels, and sweet-smelling oils and ointments. "We have traveled far, Babushka," said they, "and we stopped to tell you of the baby prince born this night in Bethlehem. He comes to rule the world and teach all men to be loving and true. We carry him gifts. Come with us, Babushka." But Babushka looked at the driving snow, and then inside at her cozy room, and at the crackling fire. "It is too late for me to go with you, good sirs," she said. "The weather is too cold." She went inside again and shut the door, and the old man journeyed on to Bethlehem without her. But as Babushka sat by her fire, rocking, she began to think about the little Christ child, for she loved all babies. "Tomorrow I will go find him," she said. "Tomorrow, when it is light, I will carry him some toys." So when it was morning, Babushka put on her long cloak and took her staff and filled a basket with pretty things a baby would like: gold balls and wooden toys and strings of silver cobwebs. And she set out to find the Christ child. But oh, Babushka had forgotten to ask the 3 old men the road to Bethlehem, and they had traveled so far through the night that she could not overtake them. Up and down the roads she hurried, through the woods and fields and towns, saying to whomsoever she met, "I go to find the Christ child. Where does he lie? I bring some pretty toys for his sake." But no one could tell her the way to go, and they all said, "Farther on, Babushka, farther on." So she traveled on and on and on for years and years, but she never found the little Christ child. They say that old Babushka is traveling still, looking for him. When it comes Christmas Eve, and the children are lying fast asleep, Babushka comes softly through the snowy fields and towns, wrapped in her long cloak and carrying her basket on her arm. With her staff, she raps gently on the doors and goes inside and holds her candle close to the little children's faces. "Is he here?" she asks. "Is the little Christ child here?" And then she turns sorrowfully away again, crying, "Farther on, farther on." But before she leaves, she takes a toy from her basket and lays it beside the pillow for a Christmas gift. "For his sake," she says softly, and then hurries on through the years and forever in search of the little Christ child. What an incredible story! Next, I'll tell you about a little girl who witnessed the birth of the Christ child. Her name was Ruth, and she was the daughter of an innkeeper in Bethlehem. This is her story. Once upon a time, in a country far away from here, there lived a little girl named Ruth. Ruth's home was not at all like our houses, for she lived in a little tower on top of a great stone wall that surrounded the town of Bethlehem. Ruth's father was the hotel keeper. The Bible says the innkeeper. This inn was not at all like our hotels either. There was a great open yard which was called the courtyard. All about this yard were little rooms where each traveler who came to the hotel rented one. The inn stood near a great stone wall in the city, so that as Ruth stood one night looking out of the tower window, she looked directly into the courtyard. It was truly a strange sight that met her eyes. So many people were coming to the inn, for the king had made that a law. For the king had made a law that every man should come back to the city where his father used to live to be counted and to pay his taxes. Some of the people came on the backs of camels with great rolls of bedding and their dishes for cooking upon the back of the beast. Some of them came on little donkeys, and on their backs too were the bedding and the dishes. Some of the people were walking slowly. They were so tired. Many miles some of them had come. As Ruth looked down into the courtyard, she saw the camels being led to their places by their masters. She heard the snap of their whips. She saw the sparks shoot up from the fires that were kindled in the courtyard, where each person was preparing his own supper. She heard the cries of the tired, hungry little children. Presently, her mother, who was cooking supper, came to the window and said, "Ruthie, thou shalt hide in the house until those people are gone. Dost thou understand?" "Yes, my mother," said the child, and she left the window to follow her mother back to the stove, limping painfully, for little Ruth was a cripple. Her mother stooped suddenly and caught the child in her arms. "My poor little lamb, it was a mule's kick just 6 years ago that hurt your poor back and made you lame." "Never mind, my mother. My back does not ache today, and lately when the light of the strange new star has shone upon my bed, my back has felt so much stronger, and I have felt so happy, as though I could climb upon the rays of that star and up into the sky and above the stars." Her mother shook her head sadly. "Thou art likely to climb much, now or ever. But come, supper is ready. Let's go find your father. I wonder what keeps him." They found the father standing at the gate of the courtyard, talking to a man and woman who had just arrived. The man was tall, with a long beard, and he led by a rope a snow-white mule, on which sat the drooping figure of a woman. As Ruth and her mother came near, they heard her father say,
"But I tell thee that there is no more room in the inn. Hast thou no friends, where thou canst go to spend the night?"
The man shook his head.
"No, none. I care not for myself, but my poor wife."
Little Ruth pulled at her mother's dress. "Mother, let the oxen sleep out under the stars these warm nights, and the straw in the caves is clean and warm. I have made a bed there for my little lamb." Ruth's mother bowed before the tall man. "Thou didst hear the child. It is as she says. The straw is clean and warm."
"We shall be very glad to stay."
The tall man bowed his head, and he helped the sweet-faced woman down from the donkey's back and led her away to the cave stable, where the little Ruth and her mother hurried up the stairs that they might send a bowl of porridge to the sweet-faced woman and a cup of new milk as well. That night, when little Ruth lay down in her bed, the rays of the beautiful new star shone through the window more brightly than before. They seemed to soothe the tired, aching shoulders. She fell asleep and dreamed that the beautiful bright star burst, and out of it came countless angels who sang in the night, "Glory to God in the highest, peace on earth, goodwill to men." And then it was morning, and her mother was then bending over her and saying, "Awake, awake, little Ruth. Mother has something to tell thee." Then, as her eyes opened slowly, the angels came in. The angels came in the night, one by one, and left a baby to lay beside your little white lamb in the manger. That afternoon, Ruth went with her mother to the fountain. The mother turned aside to talk to the other women of the town about the strange things heard and seen the night before. But Ruth went and sat down by the edge of the fountain. The child was not frightened, for strangers came often to the well, but never had she seen men who looked like the three who now came towards her. The first one, a tall man with a long white beard, came close to Ruth and said,
"Canst tell us, child, where is born he that is called the King of the Jews?"
"I know of no king," she answered, "but last night, while the star was shining, the angels brought a baby to lie beside my white lamb in the manger." The stranger bowed his head.
"That must be he. Wilt thou show us the way to him, my child?
So Ruth ran, and her mother led the 3 men to the cave. When they saw the child, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy, and opening their gifts, they presented unto him gold and frankincense and myrrh, so that Ruth's mother's eyes shone with wonder. But little Ruth saw only the baby, which lay asleep on its mother's breast. If only I might hold him in my arms, she thought, but was afraid to ask. After a few days, the strangers left Bethlehem, all but 3, the man whose name was Joseph, and Mary, his wife, and the baby. Then, as of old, little Ruth played about the courtyard, and the little white lamb frolicked at her side. Often she dropped to her knees to press the little woolly white head against her breast, while she murmured, "My little lamb, my very own, I love you, Lammy." And then together they would steal over to the entrance of the cave to peep in at the baby, and always she thought, "If I only might touch his hand," but was afraid to ask. One night, as she lay in her bed, she thought to herself, "Oh, I wish I had a beautiful gift for him, such as the wise man brought. But I have nothing at all to offer, and I love him so much. Just then the light of a star, which was nightly fading, fell across the foot of the bed and shone full upon the white lamb, which lay asleep at her feet. And then she thought of something. The next morning she arose with her face shining with joy. She dressed carefully, and with the white lamb held close to her breast, went slowly and painfully down the stairway and over to the door of the cave. "I have come," she said, "and I have brought him my white lamb." The mother smiled at the lame child. Then she lifted the baby from her breast and placed him in the arms of the little maid who knelt at her feet. A few days later, an angel came to the father Joseph and told him to take the baby and hurry to the land of Egypt, for the wicked king wanted to do it harm. So these 3, the father, mother, and baby, went by night to the far country of Egypt. And the star grew dimmer and passed away forever from the skies over Bethlehem. But little Ruth grew straight and strong and beautiful as the almond trees in the courtyard, and all the people who saw her were amazed. For Ruth once was a cripple. "It was the light of a strange star," her mother said. But little Ruth knew that it was the touch of the blessed Christ child who was once folded against her heart. What a beautiful story! I hope you enjoyed this and all the other Christmas tales we shared together around the fire. I know I did. Merry Christmas, everybody, and Happy New Year! God bless you!